Back in 1947, Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Arthur Vandenberg, in calling for bipartisanship on the issue of national security, asserted on the Senate floor that, quote, politics stops at the water's edge, close quote. Al-Qaeda, although significantly degraded, continued to threaten the United States homeland and our international neighbors. And there are also new and emerging challenges, such as the proliferation of cyber threats and capabilities that could discredit and undermine U.S. national, political, economic, and human rights issues. Although the Constitution grants the executive branch with the authority to implement the foreign policy of the United States, Congress has also been given a solemn responsibility to provide oversight. In today's increasingly complicated international security environment, Congress cannot afford to sacrifice our oversight responsibilities in some vague hope that by doing so we might be able to get along better with the White House. We have our jobs to do. As we enter the 116th Congress, I hope all of us on the subcommittee will commit to working together across the aisle to do what is best for the safety and security of the American people. In that spirit, I am pleased to inform the ranking member that, at his request, we have scheduled May 8th as a potential day to convene our next hearing on the suicide epidemic that is plaguing our nation's veterans and active military. During his first Cabinet meeting of 2019, President Trump raised the very topic that we'll examine today. Public Inspector General reports on critical areas of U.S. military operations, including Afghanistan. According to the President, government military watchdog reports should be, quote, private and locked up, close quote, and their release to the American public is, quote, insane, close quote. He also cautioned Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan not to let that happen again. America's long and strong tradition of robust and responsible congressional oversight flatly rejects the Trump administration position on this point. In fact, congressional oversight has a long history of providing tangible, real-world benefits for our warfighters serving on the front lines. For example, in the mid-2000s, when I was a member of this committee, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld had repeatedly refused to acknowledge that an insurgency was emerging in Iraq. It was only after members of this subcommittee and others meeting with American service members on the front lines in Iraq, and with the help of Stuart Bowen, the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, that members of Congress from this committee and elsewhere were fully and appropriately informed about the potential risk to American service members, and as a result were able to take action to provide our sons and daughters with armored-up Humvees and mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, or MRAPs, to protect them from IEDs, and to also fund the development and deployment of detection and counter-IED technologies. Similarly, in 2007, Congressman John Tierney, my predecessor, from my home state of Massachusetts, opened an investigation when wounded soldiers at Walter Reed Medical Center returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, many of whom had lost limbs or suffered traumatic brain injuries, reported being quartered for months in moldy and rodent-infested rooms with inadequate follow-up care. We held hearings, this subcommittee did, at Walter Reed until the situation was corrected. In another example, the U.S. Army in 2007 awarded a $300 million contract to supply ammunition to the Afghan security forces to AEI Incorporated, a company owned by an inexperienced 21-year-old. After reviewing more than 26,000 pages of documents from AEI, the Department of State, and the Department of Defense, as well as interviewing U.S. Army, Department of State, and Department of Defense contracting officials, and after multiple trips to Afghanistan by members of this committee determined that more than $66 million in taxpayer dollars were paid to a contractor who provided unserviceable munitions, much of it Vietnam-era weaponry, and some of illegal Chinese origin. 3 years later, this committee opened a 6-month investigation into the circumstances surrounding the Department of Defense's outsourcing of security for vital U.S. supplies in Afghanistan to questionable trunket companies and providers, which revealed a vast protection racket run by a shadowy network of warlords, strongmen, commanders, and corrupt Afghan officials. Not only did the system run afoul of the Department's own rules, it also risked undermining the U.S. strategy for achieving our goals in Afghanistan. So today, after more than 18 years of war in Afghanistan, more than 2,400 American servicemen have made the ultimate sacrifice in support of Operating Enduring Freedom and Operation Freedom Sentinel. More than 14,000 U.S. troops are still deployed in the region. To date, the U.S. has allocated more than $750 billion in taxpayer funds to pay for the war in Afghanistan. That's in addition to the $132 billion contributed towards efforts to secure and stabilize the country. The American people deserve and remain informed on the progress or lack of progress of our military and reconstruction efforts in Afghanistan. They have every right to know whether our sons and daughters in uniform are well deployed and well equipped, and whether taxpayer money is being well spent. The Department of Defense must also continue to permit congressional travel to the region, and especially to those locations where American servicemen are deployed, to facilitate our oversight efforts. In addition, the oversight report issued by the Special Inspector General that we discussed today since 2008 have been served to identify for the public and Congress those projects that have been subject to significant waste, fraud, and abuse. Today we'll be examining the Inspector General Subcomm's recent 2019 high-risk list of reconstruction areas that are especially vulnerable to waste, fraud, abuse, and mission failure. This report is extremely timely in light of the continuing peace negotiations led by the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Reconciliation, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad. In anticipation of a potential peace agreement that could result in a large-scale withdrawal of U.S. personnel and the reintegration of the Taliban into the Afghan government, the report examines the sustainability of U.S.-funded reconstruction programs in a post-reconciliation Afghanistan. I'd like to again thank Inspector General Subcomm for helping this committee with its work. I now yield 5 minutes to our distinguished ranking member.